Chapter 5. The impact tremor caused by the pirate ship attaching itself to the Coryopsis Charybdis caused the entire vessel to quake. Down in the engine room, the shaking caused D3 to press her hand up to the bulkhead to steady herself. "What in God's name is that?"
"Stay here," Stu said. "You'll be safe in the engineering section."
"Safe from what exactly?"
"I'll be back."
Stu ran for the entrance. Before D3 could catch up, he'd sealed the emergency hatch. Red lights blared, filling the room. A high-pitched, mechanical wail announced emergency lockdown procedures. "You're not serious." D3 was speaking, yet Stu couldn't hear her through the thick safety glass.
"I promise you'll be fine if you just stay here. I'm coming back for you."
D3 was clearly shouting at him now, yelling something. She was livid. Stupnetsky shook his head, knowing she may hate him at this moment, but she would have to forgive him eventually, due to the fact that right now, Stu was saving her life, because the Charybdis was going down in flames very soon. Elsewhere on the vessel, the man in red once more pressed a button on his temporal wrist device. A gentle and coercive wave of ambient light encased him, reflecting objects near or behind, projecting a bubble of functional invisibility. He briefly smiled, enjoying the added features of the fancy, futuristic watch. As he walked onto the bridge, the Time Lord in the crimson suit performed various complicated internal calculations, his keen eye mesmerizing the placements and settings of all visible control panels. Things were not adding up. A pretty stern woman in her 40s sat in the captain's chair, surveying the assailants on an enormous monitor.
"Where the hell did these bastards come from? Why didn't our perimeter sensors activate?"
Zhang, the navigator, looked back and reported.
"Cannot explain it. Captain, they just came out of nowhere. Damn it."
The captain stood.
"Warlock, can you give me a sensor tag on there?"
"We have intruders in sectors 118 and 119.
Shouted the security officer.
"What? How many are there?"
Zhang was spewing greetings to her.
"Talaridian class Jupiter cruiser microship. Captain, no weaponry. Ship complement."
Captain Nis Hark had moved on.
"Shut up, Zhang. How many are on board?"
Warlock looked up at the terminal.
3 hostiles. Dispatching armed teams."
The Time Lord arrived first. Cloaked, after a fashion, the man in red surveyed what was happening with the space pirates, led by a youngish blonde man in an old-style naval uniform. There were 3 of them at present, and it appeared the pirates were attempting to terrify whomever they came in contact with. Wasting no time, they fired plasma rifles intermittently at the ceiling, provoking screams and panicked running. They desired chaos among the crew. The man in red remained unseen, observing, waiting. One of the pirates, named Vichagio, was a ruddy, strong, and rough-looking bald man. He leered.
"We're only 10 levels below the bridge, John."
The leader of the pirates nodded. "We need to get to Hawk. I'm going to assume they know we've arrived."
"Just as you say, boss,"
answered another pirate, a toothless ruffian known as Rawl. Suddenly, the Charybdis security arrived, shouting, aiming weaponry. Through cross-yelling, pirates and guards ordered each other to lower their guns. The man in red watched the leader of the hostiles withdraw a vortex manipulator. John, as they called him, pressed a button, causing a small temporal embolism to explode outward and fill the immense hallway, leaving the security forces frozen in place. Frozen in that instant. The alien in the scarlet zoot suit raised his eyebrows in curiosity. That was unexpected. Mr. Red typed furiously into the crimson arm of time, extracting data on these privateers from the deep spatial abyss. The facts came back quickly. John Hart, known as one of the most dangerous criminals in the galaxy, was a former time agent branded now a temporal mortar. Hart had been in countless rehabilitation facilities for addictions to alcohol, drugs, sex, and murder. He'd had previous relationships with both Jack Harkness, former time agent and leader of Torchwood, as well as the operative code named Saber, an attractive time agent. According to the information provided, John Hart redeemed himself by helping Torchwood during some unspecified period, but aside from being located wandering on temporal nexus point Earth, his last whereabouts were listed as unknown.
Well, you are here now, John Hart,
the traveler grumbled to himself.
Far from Earth, and I want to find out what your game is.
Shrouded from the space pirate's vision, the Time Lord slowly followed the noisy savages down the immense corridor.
No response from any of the security team dispatches,
Werlick growled. Captain Hark nodded.
Activate emergency lockdown procedures.
Zhang typed into the console. Immediately, the bridge was bathed in a pulsing crimson light, and sirens wailed on high. The captain looked over at her sciences officer.
Navi, divert power from the engine core to the primary sensors.
Affirmed.
Zhang, track them,
the captain ordered.
Affirmed,
offered Zhang.
Reports say the hostiles are working their way up the Charybdis.
Captain Hark looked around at her security officer.
Where are my guards?
Out of commission,
Werlick grimaced.
I'm not receiving any response.
The captain walked over to the sciences station and stared down at the officer seated there.
Lieutenant Navi, can you get an intelligence scan on these pirates? Maybe an identification trace? Are they part of a rival empire?
The young science chief answered.
No, ma'am. No intelligence. All I'm getting are these reports of warning shots. Harassment, but no injuries. They're trying to get a lot of attention. They want the rest of the crew to know they're on their way. On their way where?
Navi hesitated, then answered.
On their way here, to the bridge, ma'am.
Privateer John Hart kept checking the readout screen of his vortex manipulator. Rawl growled at him.
What are you on about?
Simply making sure we are right on time, he answered with a crooked smile. Tachagio spit on the deck and pointed.
This way, you lot. We need to go in.
John Hart held up a hand. Hard and fast. Yes, we know.
Okay.
Tachagio shrugged.
All right. I repeat myself sometimes. Let's just hurry the hell up and get this done. I don't want to be on this damn UFP ship longer than I have to.
The space pirates drew closer to the bridge, deck by deck, threatening any Charybdis crew members or officers that crossed their path. Eventually, no one stood in their way, and they had a clear trajectory straight to the nerve center of the Coreopsis Charybdis. Upon arriving at the entryway of the bridge, Rawl and Fichagio rigged the door for detonation. Inside, another siren alarm shrieked. Werlick shouted from his station.
Captain, there's armed explosives outside the...
The doorway to the bridge blasted inward. The sudden explosion, leaving Captain Hark, Werlick, Navi, and Zhang almost deaf. A couple of moments had to pass before the command crew of the Charybdis could even hear. The dim lights of the bridge barely penetrated through the smoke. In the doorway stood the silent silhouette of Jack Hart. Werlick drew a pistol. The space pirate immediately shot him. Werlick collapsed to the floor. Navi ran to him and knelt down, checking for a pulse.
He's unconscious,
she told her captain. I suppose that would be an example. Jack Hart stepped through the threshold onto the bridge. He was bathed in crimson light of what happens to mutineers. Rawl, Fichagio entered with weapons trained. Zhang and Navi raised their hands.
Mutineers?
Captain Nishark demanded. The leader of the space pirates arched his eyebrows. Well, yes. After all, that's no way to greet your new captain. D3 wandered around the engineering section, very intestines of the Charybdis, for over 45 minutes, looking for a secondary exit. There were none. After some time, however, she finally ran into a familiar face.
Sully!
She ran to him, throwing her arms around his head.
How did you get stuck down here?
Oh, lass,
I was just wondering about the Charybdis. Bored.
Bored?
I came down here after you and your bloke. Thought maybe I'd find some real liquor hanging about.
The retired Commodore lit a cigarette.
Got a bit lost, and next thing I knew my bloody ears were shrieking from the klaxons.
D3 looked over at the sealed entrance.
Yeah. Emergency procedures. Initiated by a proximity alarm, I'd imagine.
Oh, sure.
Sully played along.
Proximity lockdown and all that.
D3 rolled her eyes. Sully enjoyed the smoke in his lungs.
At least an old man can get a puff down here.
D3 began walking toward a massive power coupling.
You definitely couldn't set off any more alarms.
This is true.
Sully exhaled some smoke.
Help me find a way out of here, please.
D3 began walking once more, but stopped when she realized that her retired Commodore companion wasn't following.
What's the issue?
She asked. Sully glanced about.
Something's very wrong here.
He bent down and touched a cable which had been severed jaggedly.
Look at this.
He showed D3.
And this isn't the only one either.
D3 nodded.
What do you think's happening down here?
Pretty obvious that someone sabotaged the engines. I've been on ships before, and I can tell you, this one isn't moving.
Well, this is where all the main subsections of the ship's power meet.
D3 stared ahead at even more busted machinery.
If you can cause a bottleneck here, you can shortchange the other systems.
Sully snapped his fingers.
Like shields, weapons, sensors.
Okay.
D3 placed her hands on her hips.
If that's the case, and systems are going down ship-wide, and we've become trapped because of the emergency lockdown, then that means...
The retired Commodore finished D3's thoughts as he stubbed out his cigarette.
That means the Charybdis has lost power, or she's under attack.
The man in red witnessed the entirety of what had transpired on the bridge. He chewed his lip in silence, thinking, calculating. After a moment, he grudgingly placed an index finger on the crimson arm of time. He took in a deep breath and pressed the button. Rawl noticed the stranger in the crimson suit appear first.
Hurry!
He shouted. He fired a warning shot at the deck, causing the stranger in red to jump.
Where'd you come from?
The man in red held up his hands, smiling broadly. Just in the neighborhood. Fichagio stalked over toward the alien, grabbed him by his red lapels, and lifted him off the floor.
How the hell did you get in here without me seeing it?
The Time Lord held his arms up feebly, comically. I was hiding behind the bullshit.
Oi!
John Hart yelled. The pirate captain slowly made his way over. He stared at Mr. Red, up and down. Finally, he asked, Are you with the Time Agency? Traveler laughed. 7 hells! Hell no! Put him down, the pirate captain ordered. Fichagio slowly set the stranger in the scarlet suit back on his feet. Thank you. The Time Lord nodded. He wasn't smiling anymore. Now, you're not going to like what happens next. Fair warning to you. Warning? To me? John Hart laughed. I have soldiers. I have guns. Hell, as of now, I'm the one in charge of the ship. What do you have? The man in red looked at his watch. I've got the crimson arm of time. The stranger vanished just as suddenly and abruptly as he had appeared. What? The pirate captain screamed. Next, the privateers witnessed the command officers of the Charybdis, Warlick, Zhang, and Navi all disappear as well, evaporating instantly. Rawl stared out.
What in God's name?
No. The pirate captain grabbed Fichagio's weapon, blasting randomly around the bridge, but it was no use. The crew were gone, having vanished one by one right in front of his eyes. Only the former captain, Miss Hark, remained, looking very befuddled. What was that? John Hart shouted. Rawl and Ficagio just stared at him. None of you heard what he said right before he disappeared? Ficagio coughed.
What is it? Out with it.
The pirate looked down, as if ashamed.
I thought I heard him say, "On the crimson arm of time."